All right, what's up, y'all? So, back again for the last lecture. So, it's been a great journey. Hopefully, you all enjoyed the journey as well. We've gone so far for pretty much a little over 100 years. We've definitely gone through everything from 1876 to 1990. That's what we're going to be, that's what we covered. And so, it's been great. And we've gone through so much, and so I know there are some things that I just have not been able to actually flesh out just because of how small the semester, how much stuff we have to cover within such a small period of time. Because we pretty much go from January to April, but there's so much history to cover where you just cannot cover it in that span of time thoroughly, at least. And so hopefully I slowly touched upon small things here and there to kind of like branch into each and every individual's style. And so there are some kind of like civil history or civil history in terms of like civil rights movement, women's suffrage, the kind of like more so of your domestic issues. We also have foreign relations kind of things going on. And then also some military history, some political history, cultural history, and stuff like that too. And so I kind of try to touch base on every single one of them, but I know there are some things that I just have not been able to actually completely divulge in. But this course is mainly just to kind of like wet your whistle and get you into that mode where you are exposed to and aware of particular parts of history, to where if you are to continue into the history realm, then when you are asked about such questions such as what do you call MAD, and of course it's mutual assured destruction, and then when they talk about speakeasies, or you talk about the Cold War or Korean War, what's the conflict between the North and South Vietnamese, you will be able to at least talk about it or engage in conversation or debate with it. And so, yeah, that's just pretty much my objective. I know the course could have been more interactive. It's just dealing with a bunch of stuff, and it's hard, but we got through it. I was able to get through the content, get that content to you guys, but yeah, hopefully in the future, once I get through paramedic school and once I get all this stuff figured out, where I can only do, where I'll be able to do one job, then that way I can actually spend more time doing this and stuff like that. So, but yeah, otherwise, I did find some stuff for you guys too. So before we get started, I love to collect antique stuff. And so one of the things I like to do is go thrifting. And so when I go to the thrift store, especially hopefully, whenever I get down there, there is like the antique mall down in off Dixie Highway. Great place. And so from there, these allergies are screwing me up. So from there, I was able to get a whole bunch of pictures. And so these pictures, here. So these are pictures from the P-51. So they're of a P-51. And so it looks like it has bubble canopies. So the bubble canopies, or the either Inglewood or Dallas style canopy, those were produced through the D and K models, I believe, or ABC. So yeah, D and K models. So it'd be pretty much after 43, so 44, 45, you'll start to see these. And so then, so yeah, here's some cool pictures of it, and so I think I have some more actually. So these ones, here you go. So here's more of this style canopy right here. But yeah, no, these are super cool. So got these fairly cheap. Actually, most of these, they came as a set, so I was able to just snag all of them for a good price. So these ones, though, these are pretty interesting. So look at the canopy. These are flatter. So these ones are going to be more so your A, B, and C models. So of course you're going to get stuff like the between the P-51A, B, or C models. So kind of like I believe it's 42 to 43 versions. So then you also have the A-36 Apache. So which is the dive bomber version of the P-51. So that's going to be the very first variant. I believe it might actually. I don't know if either one of these are it. If anything, actually, it might be either this one, maybe, and then this one. And so yeah, it's really cool if you know about the history to know that these pictures actually came from that time. So yeah, you got some cool ones right there too. But otherwise, yeah. And then another one too. I love to collect old currency or international currency. And so from the same thing, I was able to get a bunch of different currencies, and one of them, which is really cool, if I can find it actually. So we did talk about the recession in Germany and how the Reichsmark was in the millions, was worth next to nothing. So literally, it cost millions just for a piece of bread. And so what I got here, I don't know if I can be able to get this apart. Oh, stapled. Anyway, right here, I got a mark. So there you go. That was really cool to see. So I got a German Reichsbank note, which was really cool. 1924. That's when it's dated. So that will place it right after World War One. And so when, of course, right before World War II, when Germany was in this recession. So that will place that around like 1923, 1924, which is really awesome. And so yeah, I got some other places as well. So I got Italy. Also got who was it? Yeah, the Japanese government when they were when they had the peso actually. So yeah, I got France and stuff like that. I believe I have a 110. I believe I have Sudetenland. So there we go. Got another one. So this one right here, another mark. That one's placed at 1923 as well. And so that's really cool to have. Then I got another Japanese peso back here. And a rupee. And so got India as well. So yeah, I got a lot of cool pieces of currency right here. So yeah, no, so I just like to collect cool things here and there. I find it interesting. So everyone has their little niche of things they like to collect, but otherwise, I'm going to get into this, and so I won't keep you guys waiting or anything because I know you guys got your final coming up. So this will be the last part of everything, and so after this, I will have. So I usually do one bonus lecture at the very end after this last lecture, just kind of wrap things up and also just kind of like say goodbyes, my thank you for everyone. And so, yeah, to jump right into it now. So we ended off with Osama bin Laden and how he he aided in this faction of freedom fighters to push out the USSR from the Middle East, and it was funded by the U.S. And so by 1980, Osama bin Laden he begins to raise funds to aid the Mujahideen, and so. As this is going on, another guy ends up rising to power, and he essentially becomes this like to the people he becomes this like divine man who wants to just unify the Middle East and stuff like that. And so this man by the name of Saddam Hussein, he becomes president of Iraq, and after denouncing the political opposition. As traitors, and he ends up actually executing them in the middle of a political meeting. So he rules through fear, essentially. But he also, underneath that, he provided universal health care. He free education to the people. He indulged in female rights. But then slowly over time, once he became more and more popular amongst the people, and people started to rally behind him more and more, he began to rule with an iron fist. So basically, he ruled through fear and aggression, executions, stuff like that. So through that, he was able to pretty much keep control over the people. So over time, he gathered this nickname known as the known as the Madman of the Middle East, essentially. And so, throughout this whole period, you got the Oslo Accords. So, I gotta put this away. Oh my gosh, my cat. He's giving me those eyes. Come on. Yep, here you go. Oh. There you go. There you go. He always likes to stay next to the computer. So, now the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords between Palestine and Israel, essentially. And so, they recognize each other. So this is kind of like a side note, actually. So this kind of explains a little bit of stuff, too. But they start to recognize each other, and they reach a peace treaty. And so the peace treaty, basically, was... So there was two of them, actually. A second was signed, supporting the two-state agreement. Israel, essentially... What the hell are you doing? So Israel, they did not like the two-state agreement that Palestine had agreed to. And so Palestine and Israel would cohabitate the same territory, but they were separated by a demarcation zone. So essentially this demarcation zone was known as you all know, as the Gaza Strip. So that kind of like kick-started this kind of slow progression into what we now know today as the Israeli-Pakistani War. And so the Iraq-Iran War kicks off as Iraq under Saddam Hussein ends up invading Iran. And so over time, by 81, you also got Ronald Reagan, who becomes president. And under his administration, he lessened the federal responsibility on social issues back home, but he also wanted to aid or give weapons and money to the Middle East in order to fund that war, or to help with that war, essentially. And so throughout his campaign, he reduced business restrictions on places, instituted tax cuts, and he got rid of high federal taxes amongst the people. He had a strong distaste for the Soviet Union. He was just your textbook American hero. And I believe Ronald Reagan, he was an actor, actually, before he became president. And so this man actually funded the creation of the MX missile system. So basically, it was the Peacekeeper missile program. And so this Peacekeeper missile program carried up to 10 nuclear W-87 warheads. And so then the MK-21 as well was like a multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle. And so basically, this rocket would take off. Oh, hi. So this rocket would take off, and oh my gosh. So this rocket would take off, and once it reaches into the atmosphere, it would then, it would then separate, and these reentry vehicles would then target multiple sites. And then it would use the kinetic energy from entering the atmosphere again to create essentially an explosion that is on par with, oh my god, what are you doing? That is on par with a nuclear blast. So that's essentially what it is, but that's all kind of like to the side in case you were interested in knowing that stuff. Oh my gosh. But ultimately, yeah, so he funded this project with the Peacekeeper missile system. And so over time, he actually faced scrutiny because of its harm to the environment, or his involvement in the nuclear program, and its potential to actually escalate the nuclear arms race, because the USSR started to catch wind of this as well. And so, oh my gosh, this baby. So by 83, the Strategic Defense Initiative became like known as Star Wars, essentially. And so this Star Wars program was kind of outwardly, but in theory, essentially, it was a missile-based defense plan, where it would basically create a shield around the United States. It will surround the U.S. to protect it from any nuclear warheads that would come into its airspace, essentially. So it's essentially a way to remove or to move from that mutual aid destruction theory, essentially. Oh my gosh, there you go. Whew, that's got a lot of hair. Yeah. So yeah, essentially that's what it was. He wanted to move away from the mutual aid destruction and ensure that the U.S. was not going to be the one that will fall. And so he wanted to make sure to minimize the amount of damage a nuclear war would happen upon the U.S. And so, um, this essentially rendered most nuclear warheads obsolete over time. And so it had two layers to it. Basically, space interception of missiles, and then the second one would be ground-based missiles used to intercept those missiles getting past the space defense, essentially. And so the weapons would start to include, lasers, particle beams, sensors, computer systems, cyber warfare, EMP strikes, stuff like that. And so over time, once this program started ramping up, it lost footing because of one thing: cost. And so it became way too costly, and the USSR ends up catching wind of it and saw it as an aggression and potential threat. And so they started to ramp up their program on that stuff. And so, um, basically, over time, this defense proposal was ushered into advancements in protection systems in the U.S., which the U.S. actually still uses today. And so it wasn't a forgotten thing, and so we still use some of those experimental systems today. So otherwise, yeah, the Star Wars system kind of like just went downhill. But that's kind of like an example of how outwardly this nuclear program started ramping up to be. Back to my apple cider. And so another thing too, around this time as well, so the space race is kind of like, it's kind of losing some ground, so they needed something else. The US needed a way to economically continue to space travel without the development of new space capsules every single time, because it just became way too costly, and they couldn't keep up with that cost, especially with the rise of the nuclear arms race and dealing with the potential of a nuclear arms war, and so they couldn't do two at the same time. So the Columbia was built, and it makes its first launch. And so at the same time, you got some other things too, like, MTV comes to prominence. Sandra Day O'Connor, she becomes the first judge, Supreme Court judge, female Supreme Court judge. And then like, other things too, like, 1982, that's, Thriller. Michael Jackson kicks off with Thriller. And then it becomes the most popular album on TV, on MTV especially. And then you also got the yuppie culture. Yuppie culture basically is where young adults who become less inclined to rebel, they become more inclined to get into politics and businesses and stuff like that. And so the whole idea now in America is to get rich and get rich quick, or get rich just by taking risks, stuff like that. Basically, just get rich, get more money, pay for more stuff, and just this culture based on materialistic ideas became more prominent. And so, over time, you got stuff like the Falklands War that kind of kicks off. And then you also got like, widespread sex becomes more prominent amongst like hetero and homosexuals. The idea of homosexuality starts to rise to prominence. The AIDS epidemic kicks off, and then it reaches nationwide media. And so you got all these social issues, and social constructs starting to come to light in the 1980s. But then you also got the Beirut bombing. And so these terrorist attacks actually kill about 300 French and U.S. soldiers at this time. And so you got this kind of rise in terrorist attacks slowly over time. And so you got two different things happening. You got the rise of wars overseas. You also got social issues, and especially the AIDS and HIV epidemic kind of kicks off in the America. You got the space race going on. So much change is happening throughout the 80s. And so by the mid 80s, about 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev, he actually dies. No, he does not. He becomes leader. Sorry. So he becomes leader, leader of the USSR. And then he is the one that causes, I don't want to say causes, but he begins to kickstart this decline or the death of the USSR, essentially. He starts to bring about social and economic change to the USSR. Then that's where you get, like, you know, the Chernobyl disaster, which was the worst nuclear reactor accident in history. And so the USSR actually at this time now tries to hide the truth from the general public because they don't want people to know that they screwed up with this mistake. They also don't want people to know that basically they caused a nuclear disaster, that they're failing at this nuclear arms race that's going on. I thought I was about to sneeze. At the same time, too, in the U.S., another thing happens. And so you got the USSR, who's trying to protect or trying to hide the general public against the their nuclear disaster. Well, the U.S. is now trying to hide something from the general public about the space race, the Challenger explosion. And so 7 astronauts, I believe 1 teacher is involved as well, 1 female teacher. The first teacher actually to go to space. And Challenger, of course, takes off without issue, but then before it even reaches space, it explodes on national TV. And so what I want to hint at, though, is that there's like a documentary, I believe, and I did some reading up too, and essentially it was known that there were some defects in the aircraft, but this was supposed to be a pivotal moment in NASA's history, in the whole space race history. And so they needed to, for a political reason, they needed to launch this aircraft. They needed to get it into the air, or the spacecraft. They needed to get into space. And so, despite all the defects that it had, they sent these astronauts into space. And ultimately, they didn't even make it. And it all came down to one thing and one thing only. It was an O-ring failure. They knew that these O-rings had defects, but they decided to keep going with the project, and they launched it, and that caused the death of these 7 people. And so now you got USSR hiding stuff. You got the United States wanting to keep information from the general public and stuff like that too. And so, but yeah, you got all these different things. And so now, 1988. So this is kind of like when things start to pivot, essentially. So you got things like, you got Tiananmen Square, the student-led demonstration against the Chinese Communist government. So the Chinese ended up mobilizing the military, and I believe, I can't remember off the top of my head how many students ended up passing away or dying, but same thing. The Chinese wanted to keep that from the general public. So they don't announce how many students end up actually passing away or that they actually killed these students. Also, you got the Berlin Wall finally gets knocked down. This ends these, decade-long split between the East and the West, Germany, and then the Iron Curtain begins to crumble essentially right after that. But then earlier on, actually, so this all happened in like 1989. And then, oh my gosh, my sister just messaged me. So 1989, this all happens. But also, back in 1988, Osama bin Laden, he forms Al-Qaeda. So basically, it's an organization of the Mujahideen fighters. And the U.S. ends up backing these insurgents against the Soviet Union. And so then, at the same time, there's a Pan Am Flight 103. It explodes after a bomb is detonated inside, which kills 260 people on board. And then when it crashes, 11 people on the ground also die as well. So then you also got, so after this, Ronald Reagan is not president anymore. George Bush Sr. becomes president at this time as well, and so then I'm kind of jumping around. Sorry about that, but there is a lot. So then, 1990, you got Kuwait. So Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, ends up invading Kuwait. So then the Gulf War finally kicks off, August 2nd, 1990. So actually, the day before my birthday, well, I was born in 94, but essentially August 3rd of 94 is when my birthday is. But yeah, August 2nd, 1990, that's when the Iraq invaded Kuwait, started the Gulf War. And so this invasion of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein is also known as Desert Storm, which you guys may know, especially with Full Metal Jacket, I believe that's no, Jarhead. So Jarhead is what it is. Jarhead essentially is a take on the Gulf War at that time. So same month, the following year, so August of 1991, due to widespread corruption that's going on with the Soviet Union, especially after the Chernobyl disaster and trying to hide things from the general public, and the lack of transparency that they had, the Soviet Union starts to politically fall apart by this time. And so, essentially, then Gorbachev, he institutes a two-party election system. So now he's starting to get away from this whole communist movement. Gorbachev now was in Crimea and approached by his chief of staff and the KGB, which is the USSR, the Soviet police. He tried to use the phone, but then it ends up actually going dead before he actually can get aid outside. So these informants actually declared a state of emergency and forced him to transfer power to his vice president, Gennady Yanayev. So then Gorbachev, he was put under house arrest after refusing, and then like a day later, he was proclaimed ill health and kept under surveillance. And so that was kind of like a secretive kind of thing that was going on in the USSR. So the state press, they wanted to get more information on it, but they were prevented to do anything. And so they also start these protests and stuff like that because the government's keeping them from doing their job, but essentially they were arrested for that. They were prevented from doing any of these demonstrations and strikes. 2 days later, a new union treaty was brought up. So it was attempted to be signed by but the public didn't really like it. The USSR, they had soldiers who started to mobilize in the country and tried to take control of the country militarily. And so these protests started to kick off. And so when these protests happened, at the Parliament building, and the building was then barricaded right after that. Yanayev, he starts to issue a statement. Oh my gosh, why is his butt on the... What are you doing? So Yanayev actually issues a statement saying what's going on and that it's unforgivable that he and his friend Gorbachev are in this together, even though he's lying. And so over time, they start to realize that he's lying, and Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, the Baltic states, places like that, ends up starting to adopt nationalism. They become independent from the Soviet Union, and then ultimately, by 91, by the 20th, or shortly after the 20th, August 20th of 91, essentially the USSR dissolves. Russia is then accepted by the U.S. as a superpower by this time. 93, Bill Clinton then becomes president. He's the second Democratic president later on to serve 2 consecutive terms, essentially. So he alone brought about the first budget surplus in decades, essentially. So over time, this was the highest home ownership in decades, the lowest inflation rate since the 70s. He opened NATO to more countries later on, and increased worldwide trade. He did so much stuff. He campaigned against the drug trade, essentially, sent peace forces to Bosnia and war-torn Iraq, and after inspections for nuclear and biological and chemical warfare or warheads were essentially terminated out there. Over time, he called for a national initiative to end racial discrimination. So he started a fight against all this stuff throughout the 90s. And he wanted to improve the educational system. He wanted to restrict gun sales, which was a very touchy subject amongst people. Focused on environmental organizations. But essentially, all in all, that's when the Cold War ended, with the fall, the collapse of Russia, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the U.S. recognition of Russia as an equal military power, and then their movement from total communism to now the socialist government. So the U.S. and Russia then at this point, with like 1991, 1992, 3, they began to have a sense of optimism. So they became to have the sense of optimism in the future for a potential friendship and geopolitical partnership going forward with protection. And so this U.S. economic boom between Russian economic collapse led to a sense of separation, though. And so there were attempts to keep a partnership in hand, but slowly over time it just started to kind of like dissolve away. There was no aggression or anything. It was just things that happened. Kuwait was then liberated. Iraq then retreats out of it. But then the U.S., they take a hold on oil supplies, protecting economic interests. But then Saddam Hussein is contained to Iraq, and then he's prevented further regional aggression, essentially. And so now you got the U.S. taking a foothold on the oil in the Middle East. And you also got Saddam Hussein, who's now cornered back in Iraq. And so the increased military presence, bases, installations, and stuff like that, they created these to support Saudi Arabia, or allies in this war like Saudi Arabia. So at the Madrid conference as well, this was to settle the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, essentially, as well. So there's two different things going on. So now you got the U.S. now taking a colonial foothold in the Middle East, but you also got this Arab-Israeli kind of like back and forth as well going on. So there's two things now going on before the early thousands. And so with the first Arab-Israeli conflict, this is the first time not in history, but in a while, that the Arab and Israelis have a face-to-face talk about this stuff. At the same time, Saudi Arabia then accepts U.S. military assistance into the country as aid, and Osama bin Laden ends up becoming severely upset with this. Like, at first, they had the USSR coming in, and the U.S. helped them out. Great, that's fine. But now the U.S. now has a foothold in the Middle East, and he sees the same thing going on that the Soviet Union was doing earlier on. He does not like that. And so he talks to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia basically ignores him. So he ends up leaving Saudi Arabia for Sudan. And he begins to teach his idea of jihad. So jihad is essentially called a holy war. So Jihad. Jihad, that's what it is. So essentially it's this holy war, or this war against these outside people, these invaders, essentially related to the crusade. It's a crusade against Christians, or these people who are invading and taking over their land. And so this kind of kicks off. And so by 96, that's when you start hearing about the Taliban. So the Taliban, through jihad, is created, and they start to take back Afghanistan. And then he then sought refuge in Afghanistan. So then by 01, so this is 96. So then this goes over for like 5 or so years. And then by 01, you also got So sorry, 96 he takes over. He takes back Afghanistan. He sought refuge in Afghanistan, and so now from here on out, he's like, you know what? I'm gonna lead a holy war against the United States in order to push them away because we cannot have them in our land. So that's where we get to '01. Muhammad Ati and Abdul Aziz Al Amari, they walk through security and board Flight 11. So Flight 11 takes off, I believe, from Boston to LA with 5 hijackers and 76 total passengers and 11 crew members. And then at the same time, United States Airlines 175 takes off from Boston with 51 passengers and 9 crew and 5 hijackers under Marwan al-Shahi, Fayez Beni Hamad, and a few others as well. So then you get this radio traffic. Air traffic controllers start to receive radio traffic. So Betty Ong radios to the flight tower that the plane has been hijacked. So they're like, what's going on? Then you also got another one. American Airlines Flight 77 then takes off from DC to LA with 53 passengers, 6 crew, 5 hijackers as well, under Hani Hanjour, Nawaf Al-Azmi, and a few others as well. So Muhammad Atta, he makes a mistake actually. He ends up pushing the button to the air controllers instead of actually to the cabin. He alerts them to the hijacking instead of the passengers only. He makes sure that everyone's okay, stuff like that too. But then it's not. So then when the air traffic control gets this call, that's when the Air National Guard then alerted and scrambles a pair of F-16s. At the same time, so they go supersonic trying to find these planes. United States, United 93, they leave New Jersey to San Francisco with 33 passengers, 7 crew, and 4 hijackers under Zaid Jarrah, Ahmed Aznawi, and then I believe those only 2 I can remember off the top of my head. And so the FDNY chief at the time, Joseph Pfeiffer. So there's a video on this. Actually, there was a I guess professional, but then kind of like an amateur shooting a documentary about FDNY at the time. So Joseph Pfeiffer, he was testing a gas leak along with Jules Naudet at the time. So Jules Naudet was a filmmaker. He was the filmmaker documenting the FDNY at the time. And so Joseph Pfeiffer was looking down. He was kind of figuring out the manholes and where the leak was coming from. And then you actually in the video see this plane flying overhead. It slams into the North Tower. So that's Flight 11. Flight 11 then slams into the North Tower, kills everyone on board, trapped employees above the 91st floor. So it goes head on into it. 15 minutes later, though, Flight 175 then crashes into the South Tower. All on board unkilled, and anybody trapped above the 85th floor essentially is stuck there. And so at first, everyone thought it was just a fluke. So that's why the response was kind of like confused at first. They didn't really know what to do until 15 minutes later. That's when they're like, "This is a terrorist attack." So everything went on lockdown. All flights were grounded. Security was at all-time high. Then you also had pretty much a full response from all police, fire, medical, everyone, FEMA, everyone came out. And so President George W. Bush is notified 2 minutes later, actually, as the towers were hit. He was at an elementary school in Florida, but he had to keep everyone calm, so he didn't really react because now he knew that things were going awry. Flight 93 was taken over, and then that was going to head towards, I believe, the Capitol. No, to the White House, I believe. Flight 77 then strikes the Pentagon, killing 125 people in the building. And actually, my uncle, he was in the Pentagon at the time of this airstrike, but he was actually in the weight room at the time. And so we were all trying to, well, actually, I was 6, 7. Actually, I was 7 years old Yeah, '01 September. So yeah, I was 7 years old at the time, and I remember, of course, my parents were just crazed. They were trying to get in touch with my uncle. They couldn't, which was my dad's brother. And finally, later on, he ends up picking up the phone, and he ended up saying that he was okay. But yeah, where his office was actually where the building hit, or where the building was hit. And um, so essentially, 77 hits its mark on the Pentagon. Flight 93 ends up crashing into a field in Pennsylvania as the crew and the civilians in the cabin actually attempt to mutiny against the strike, or the what was it, the hijackers. And so by this time now, U.S. airspace is shut down. Flight 93 is located right before it slams into the field, but they couldn't get to them in time. Bush orders all planes left in the air to be shot down, essentially. So anyone who's left in the air after being grounded, immediately getting shot down. At the very same time, though, North Tower collapses. And so by this time, DEFCON 3 is now in effect. Air Force One lands in Louisiana, then takes him to Nebraska, and Bush is then taken to a secure bunker after that. Building 7, right next to the World Trade Center, that ends up collapsing as well. And then ultimately, you got the South Tower ends up collapsing shortly after. And so by this time, about 343 New York firefighters die. 71 PD officers die. And then in total, 1,600 end up dying inside the North Tower. Another 614 die in the South Tower, not including all the people in the plane as well. And so this is basically the first time in American history that, besides actually since World War II, that's debatable, especially because of the whole social construct that's going on at the time. But this is pretty much the very first time in the history that everybody is rallied together against a common cause. So this attack by Osama bin Laden, who orchestrated this whole attack, essentially, this now started the manhunt for him. This also brought everyone together under a common hatred. Sadly, it is a common hatred against the Muslim people themselves, and so now you get this racial hatred growing within the United States, and that's when Bush declares a war on terrorism, and he's like, "All right, all bets are off. We invade the Middle East." And so now there's this manhunt for not only Al Qaeda but also Osama bin Laden at this point, which just 10 years earlier we were funding it. So that's kind of like this backwards cycle that now we come around. And so essentially after this, now I believe you all will probably be old enough to remember just when, actually around that time when we start to slowly, we're right in the middle actually of the war on terrorism is roughly where everyone should, I think, be born around that time, and so, or shortly after. And so essentially that's it, really. So after this war on terrorism starts, that's when we get this domestic notion of, all Muslim people are against us and stuff like that too. But it's certainly not true. But that's all stems from this September 11th attack, which causes widespread hatred towards a certain people. And that's when the war in the Middle East started, and it's just a cascades down. But this also changed security. So now it went from being more lax in terms of travel to now it's super secured down. It's locked down. We also get this gradual foothold in the Middle East, and so then I explained the whole Gaza Strip thing. So now that leads to the war in was it the Israeli-Palestinian war. You also then get Ukraine, which backs out of the Warsaw Pact, or also the Iron Curtain kind of crumbles, but also now, because of the Curtain crumbling, that's when you get this push for those states that were originally part of the USSR to now gravitate towards NATO. So then you got NATO actually pushing up against the border of Soviet or of Russia now by this point, and Russia does not want that. So then Russia then invades Ukraine. That's when you get the Soviet-Ukrainian War. And so the Soviet invasion of Ukraine, essentially. And so that just happened recently as well. So we make these connections. Well, also with Korea. So then you got China wanting to take over Korea because Korea is now they're allies with Japan, who Japan is part of an alliance with the U.S. And so now you got, or Taiwan, sorry. So Taiwan wants to remain independent, but then also Japan, it respects that. So then, in the off chance that China then invades and takes over Taiwan, that's when you get Japan, which comes into that war to aid them in that war, and then that draws us into that war. So all these different connections throughout history in the past is now coming full circle to now. And so whatever information you find out now can be traced back to all this history in the past. And so that's essentially the story of the U.S. From 1876 to 1991. But I did go another decade later just because I wanted to make that connection between the 1991, the Gulf War, and then how that kind of culminates into September 11th, 2001, and then later on down the road. So otherwise, that's about it. And so I'll put this online today, or hopefully whenever it gets uploaded today. And then you'll have this information leading into your final. I know it is a lot of pages, but just think of it, it's only 4 to 5 pages, single spaced. As long as you write that, just double space it afterwards, you have your 10 pages, 8 to 10 pages. I am going to try and get all that done in the middle of finals week. I know you guys essentially get done before finals week, so you won't have a final going into that week of the final. So essentially that whole week is free for you to focus on your other classes, to make sure that you do well on your exams. I have no doubts that you guys will do well on your exams, and essentially just have fun with your summer. So I believe I'll be teaching US 2 again in the fall, and hopefully by that time I'll be a little bit more free. I'll still be going through paramedic school, sadly, but I do end in October. So hopefully September, October. So by the time the semester starts, I will be busy, but then by the time it ends, I should be more free. So I'll, at that point, in hindsight, I should be studying for my registry at that point. So in between, I'll just be studying for that. But otherwise, my classes should be essentially done by that point. So yeah, no, that's, like I said, that's the whole story of the U.S. I know I didn't get through everything that I wanted to get through, just because of the amount of time we had and the amount of time I have with devoting to the class, which I do apologize for. But ultimately, we got it done. We made our trek through history, and so hopefully the class was not that boring to you guys. Hopefully the class was interesting, especially with my cat, Taters, and then with my little mini whiteboard and stuff like that too. And then other than that, that should be it, really. And so I'll have one more lecture coming up. It's nothing to take notes on. It's just kind of formal thing that I like to do with just addressing the students and then just making sure that you guys are good going into this final, or into finals week, or just into the rest of your careers, whatever it may be. Whether you would do continue with history or if this is just a course credit, that is fine too. But as long as I made a lasting impression on you guys and I was able to give you guys some information you never had in the past or didn't see, or didn't really know about as much. And so, yeah, so I'm gonna get going, but if you don't have any other questions, I will let you guys go, and so you can focus on your other classes and everything. So Sometimes I'm on campus, sometimes I'm not. Usually when I'm on campus, I'm bugging my mom. But I do have sometimes some office hours, essentially here and there. If you guys do want in-person help, I'm more than happy on certain days to come in. Usually after my class, when I get off, I go to Sharonville right after my class, and so usually I'll have time that morning to come into UC Blue Ash, and then I'll have our office hours set up. What 389 of Walters? Yeah, Walters 389. So I'll be on the third floor at the very end of the hall. But yeah, like I said, I'm gonna get going so I can clean up and get the rest of my day started. Do some studying. So I have a exam on Wednesday. And then other than that, ta ta guys. It's been real.